Between two dumbbells is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered medical, fitness, or nutritional advice.
You're between two dumbbells. I'm your host, Skip Hill, bringing 40 years of bodybuilding experience to the table. And I'm here today, as usual, with Dr. Marv, a.k.a. the educated meathead. And thankfully, he's bringing the brains to the operation. Today, we're going to posit...
One of us has to.
Yeah, one of us has to, exactly. Today, we're going to posit another exercise that should be a pretty good discussion. Curious if we're going to agree on it, disagree on it. Take the posit, you run with it, you tell me what you think, and I'll tell you whether I agree or not.
Yep. All right. So my posit, and this is going to maybe offend some people, but good. Comment below, let us know. My posit is that squats, for the most part, are an incredibly overrated movement in terms of bodybuilding aesthetics and the end result for the vast majority of people. I am not saying we never do squats. I think it's a valuable skill to learn in the beginning, but I think we would both agree that the end result of super heavy barbell squats for the vast majority of people creates that turnip leg looking appearance that John Meadows talked about.
Yep.
And then we're going to have a whole bunch of little offshoots because we're going to talk a whole bunch of stuff, right? But that's today's posit.
Well, it's going to be hard for me to find something I disagree with you on as far as that topic so far, but I'm pretty good at finding things I can disagree with people on. So let's see what happens. I'll tell you what, run with it. And this is nuanced. There's a lot there to unwrap. Absolutely. Because I know, people are listening right now going, wait a minute. I've read articles in magazines, especially the old heads. And I've heard for years that squats are king. You're a pussy if you don't squat. That might be true. Well, I'm probably a pussy whether I squat or I don't squat. I've never really been all that tough, but I'm with you so far. So yeah, let's break this down.
Yep. So we're going to have to go into biomechanics very shortly, but the general thought is for the vast majority of folks, a barbell squat is a hip dominant movement, meaning glutes and adductors are going to grow more than quads. Now, what's the argument everybody goes? Well, look at Tom Platz. So yes, let's look at Tom Platz.
Yeah.
People who love squats whose quads blow up. So again, we're talking about the unbalanced current look of a lot of people where huge glutes and adductors, quads are big, but they're overpowered, right? And it's kind of a funky look. Again, the sport is incredibly individualized and personal preference with aesthetics. But I do think we want a little bit more balance of leg musculature. And why Tom Platz did so great with squats is he had incredibly short femurs, which is your thigh bone, which allowed him to do effortless, high bar, incredibly vertical torso angle, deep as hell squats. So the people who do squats and their quads blow up typically have shorter limbs, especially in the lower body. It allows them to be significantly more upright, get really deep, and able to drive the torque to the knee joint versus the hips. And again, we'll break that down with a sec with a video using moment arms and all that. But again, those who do squats and whose quads blow up, their body shape fits the movement. I think that is the exception rather than the rule.
Which could be argued then, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Does Tom Platz have big quads because he squatted and took a mediocre or less than mediocre genetic predisposition and grew big quads? Or was it more that when he squatted, all of that stress and stimulus went directly to those quads and blew them up? I've always said the same thing about Johnny. Is his back really good because of deads? Or is he just really good at doing deads and he was going to have a ridiculous back anyway? It's something that, we could argue or debate till we're blue in the face, but we're not really going to know what that answer is. Correlative? or cause it.
Yep.
It's a tough one.
That is forensics, and that's a dangerous rabbit hole to go down because nobody has the answer, right?
Sure. Well, and I think we're mature enough to be it, which is odd for me to use the word maturity or maturation process in any sentence involving Skip.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we're admitting that these are opinions. And I wish more people would do that. We're not talking in absolutes. We rarely do that, if ever. It's just not a good idea. We're here to give opinions based on our experience, in your case, knowledge, the fact that you're incredibly articulate and well-educated. That kind of makes up for the fact that apparently I'm a little bit more the brawn and you're much more the brain. You have a combination of the two. I'm just primarily brawn. It's a 95-5 split ratio for me.
Yep.
But this brings to, what it does is it brings to light, and it's something that I've noticed over the last handful of years, maybe longer, but it's really stood out over the last handful of years. The legs in this industry, to me, and I'll say it, I don't think they're very pleasing. Sometimes I look at the lower body of the open bodybuilders these days, and as much as I'm impressed with the size and, look, the sport, like any other sport, is going to continue to progress. That's where old people sometimes get irritated with things. They don't like progression. We want everything to stay the same because that's our comfort zone. I'm okay with the progression. If I have to pick between the two, you go back to kind of like the 80s or the early 90s, not back to the 70s. I wasn't impressed with, the legs during the Arnold era and that sort of thing. But when you get into the Lee Haney days and the Rich Gaspari days, there's adductors. There's adductors there. But Sean Ray, great legs, not glute and adductor down. I don't think many bodybuilders back in the 80s, early 90s were very glute dominant at all. And there's reasons I think there are reasons. We can get into that, obviously as well. But the progression with the look is just like you said, it's not aesthetically pleasing. Now, if you go into the classic division, day and night, you're not going to go in the classic division with an open bodybuilding lower body of glutes and adductors, because if you do, you're not going to fare very well. I also posit that there is a connection. Now, someone will find, and this is why I like discussing this when we have viewers and listeners, because someone's going to find that caveat and they're going to be like, what about this guy? And I want to see it. Show me an example where you have someone who is very glute and adductor dominant and they have a small waist with a really good shoulder to waist. This isn't a slam on anybody because I have mad respect. Dusty Hanshaw is a good example. Mad respect for Dusty. Yep. He turned, I want to say, above mediocre genetics into crazy, crazy pro physique. But he'd be the first to admit that he had to dig. That's a work ethic issue. I don't think he thought, I was born with these. I was born to be a pro. No, he just literally willed it to happen. And he is more adductor. I almost kind of call it kind of blocky legs. And it's hard to critique somebody like Dusty or Dorian Haywood is another good example. Platts to some degree. The reason Platts gets away with it is because it's if you're ever going to be adductor dominant, at least he did it in the prettiest way possible because he still did have ridiculous quads as well.
Yep.
So, but if you take those adductors out of there, you're taking a third of that leg size and you're just getting rid of it. So is it leg size that we want or is it quad size that we want? I don't know. Ronnie Coleman, good example. Ridiculously huge glutes. Listen, I've said it a million times. I'll say it again. Arguably the best bodybuilder on the planet ever. And nothing will ever or has not yet replicated that rear black and white shot of his glutes reaching back to do a lat spread. It's just otherworldly. But he still had big quads. He was a big time squatter, obviously, arguably a power lifter, much more so than even a body. He was a power lifter doing bodybuilding moves for the most part. But genetically, I think he was just predisposed to that type of quad development, which kind of went against his training. But he still had that balance. You don't look at the front of his quads or him from the front and think, oh, yeah, he's really adductor dominant. Ain't sure where I was going with that. More, I think this is one of those times. Hold on. I got to use these smart pads. I got to get into these smart pads. So my point just is that change, that visual change, we could say it's not as pleasing to me. I would rather see the more of an aesthetic classic type look to the legs. Not that they're not big. I'm okay with size. I just want that size coming from the quads much more so than the adductor. So let's do this. You take the wheel and tell me from a training standpoint, because there's a difference. I mean, you see people squat, and it's all, I could literally almost look at the legs of a bodybuilder and tell, okay, Dusty's probably not doing high bar upright squatting. And this comes back, like you said earlier, to the fact, what's that femur length? What's that ratio when you get into the levers between the torso, the upper thigh bone, the femur, and then get into whatever that tibula, you know what I mean? This is where you come in handy because you know all this shit. Obviously, the lower leg from the knee to the ankle. This all matters and it all fits together.
Yeah, so we need to kind of define, how do you know if your squat is knee, aka quad dominant, or hip, aka glute, and then adductor dominant. So let me explain what that is. And also, we're going to break down a front squat and a heel elevated back squat doesn't automatically mean it's more quad dominant than hip. We're going to show you what a moment arm is. So real quickly, I guess I should have done this before I broke down the screen, but the moment arm is essentially the distance between where the line of pull is. In this scenario, gravity's pulling straight down, hence the resistance band. So it's where that line of pull is in relation to the joints that are moving. So let's everybody do an arm bicep curl motion and stop with your elbow at 90 degrees. So the moment arm is from your hand to your elbow, right? So the farther a joint is away from that line of pull, that will be getting the emphasis. So we want to get a quad dominant, aka knee dominant squat. You want the distance between the line of pull farther from the knee than from the hip. You with me so far?
I see where you're going.
Yep.
Well, yeah, because that lends itself to the more of the upright position then, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a badass pro, Jackie Hurry. She's amazing. So she's squatting, and I'm going to pause right there. If you could see, right, the band is, pretty much even, but it's farther away from her hip than her knee. So that is a glute dominant squat. So she's going to go again, and we're going to talk about that distance. So she's going to squat down again, and you could see, right? Yeah, the band kind of comes apart, but it is farther away from her glute than her knee. So that is a quad dominant. Now, if she switches to a front squat, everybody says front squats are more quads. Maybe, maybe not.
The studies don't say that. Neither do the EMGs.
Again, look how farther away that is from her hip than her knee. So for her, a front squat is still glute dominant. Now, she will get a little bit more stretch on the quad because she's a little bit more upright, but the joint that is getting taxed the most with the most torque is still her hips, aka glutes. And yes, one study, surface EMG, we've talked about the limitations, but it's what we have. One study found in a deep ass to grass squat, your adductors fired before your glutes did. So now she's going to come up. So again, you could see the distance, right? It's farther away from her hip than her knee. So she might get a tiny bit more stretch on it, but the glute is still a primary mover. Okay.
Let me I will postulate instead of posit this time. I want to ask this. If you, assuming that balance wasn't an issue for just a moment, obviously it is. If the bar is on, keep her in that position right there, because this is a great visual for this. If the bar being in the front right now versus changing to being on her back, where a normal, the normal position for a back squat, the further, even though it's only 6-7 inches, 6-7 inches is a lot, right?
Yep.
It's like that big. Yeah. So
that's what I'm told.
That's what I have programmed in my brain. I don't know what my wife does, but anyway, point is that bar position being off the back of the shoulder versus the front, being closer to the hip is going to make for more quad involvement, correct? That's number one.
If you're doing a high bar. So as we're doing, so what do most of the strongest squatters do? They do a powerlifting style squat. So it's low bar, which will by definition tax significantly more of the hip. So she kind of did
what I was going into. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Correct.
So then you get more of an upright position with that back squat. Like if you have the exact, let's just say she's completely upright, just for the sake of the argument. She's completely straight up. there would arguably then be more stress on the quad with the bar on the back than in the front because the bar is closer to the hip.
Correct. Because once again, what I said in the beginning, people with short femurs could do a natural, very high bar squat, i.e., look at Tom Platz. His practically upright. They are going to get quads with no heel elevation, not having to drive the knees forward. They're going to get that because they are naturally high bar. Who are the strongest people in the world? Powerlifters. They do low bar, right? So that's going to tip their torso forward. So her chest would be closer to the ground, right? That angle would increase, which then is going to shift the bar even further away from her hip, as well as increase the stretch. So most of the world's strongest squatters are all low bar because you're stronger using your glutes and hip muscles than your knee, aka quads. Also, we know that as you get more advanced in general, newbies to squatting, regardless of what they do, typically rely on their hip extensors to get out of the hole. More advanced folks could start to use their knee extensors as they get out of the hole. But we're trying to, once again, make an argument that just because you do a front squat, just because you elevate your heels, it doesn't automatically make it quad dominant. Everybody's an N of 1. So in research, N is the number of participants. So that's why you can't make ultimatum statements, because my femur length is different than yours. It's different than hers.
Sure. Exactly. Yep. And I think, and let me know if you agree with this or not, or if you disagree, but I think the reason that most people, myself included, first assumed that front squats were better for the quad is because, at least in my brain, I thought that the bar being in the front is forcing me behind where the bar would be if it were on my back. So I get it. Logically, it makes sense until you look at the path of the bar and where it ends up during the movement. And then it's like, oh, I was wrong.
Correct.
A lot of us were wrong.
Yep. And then, like, to each their own, but I don't like doing a squat movement where I'm being choked to death. So
it's very difficult to breathe. Very, very difficult to breathe.
So now we elevated our heels. So people go, if I elevate my heels, it's automatically more quad. Not necessarily. You will be able to get a little bit more depth. So I think I talked about this. I don't think you're on the episode when I went on your other podcast, BSG. I don't think you were there, but like, I think most people would benefit from heel elevation regardless of what they're trying to do, because you could get a little bit deeper because it takes away, a lot of people's restriction with squats is their ankle.
Yeah.
Right. Not the hips, right? Usually it's the ankle. Usually it is a lack of what is called dorsiflexion, i.e. you're raising your toes up towards your knee. That's usually a limiting factor for more people than hips. Now, the hip mobility comes into play with, are you, maximizing strength and output by utilizing muscles better? But the ankle for the vast majority of people is the limiting factor. So she will get a little bit deeper because of the heel elevation, but let's see if this automatically makes it more quads for her. And apparently I'm doing a nice big rant. So she's going to go again. And she's going to go one more time. I hope we're going to pause it. So she's deeper. Yes. Everybody could see she's a little bit deeper, which great. We're getting a little bit more stretch on the quad. So you are increasing the quad recruitment slightly, but it still could be a little bit better. So it's definitely improved.
Yeah.
Yep. It's definitely improved. But if you want to really make it quad dominant, she's going to have to push her knees forward. And I have another video I'll bring up. Her goal is to drive the knees forward. See how that automatically increased the moment arm, i.e. the distance between the band and her knees. And then the key is when you come up, you don't let your hips shoot back. You keep your knees forward. So when I'm teaching this in office or, occasionally somebody who's needs help with a lagging body part, I will do, very special one-on-one. I'm going to put my hand on her knee. She has to keep her knee in contact with my hand when she comes out of the hole.
Good point.
So now that is a quad dominant, because now see how her knee is significantly farther forward and she's pivoting through the knee rather than the hip.
Yeah.
So let me show one more video and then I'll quit sharing my screen and then we will go. And this is my top squat attachment that we talked about.
Nice.
That I absolutely love from Dave Draper. And I got my Christmas Story leg day shirt. And yes, I have that lamp in my office 365 days a year. Yes, I own a pink bunny suit.
There's a personal story there. My wife loves that, and I don't like. I am National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
That's funny.
She is, so we fight over the remote on Christmas Day.
Yeah, that's funny. I even have a Christmas Story board game, but I digress. So
nice.
Watch me. So this is a perfect example. So my heels are elevated. Great. I come down. Now watch what happens first. My hips shoot back. So I'm not breaking with the knee. I'm breaking with the hip. So hips shoot back first, right? So yes, my heels are elevated. I'm getting deeper, but see how my initial movement out of the hole is hips back.
Yep.
So now,
which is difficult to do on a Smith machine when you have elevation and you want that perfect angle, because you're going to have to reset that wedge and reset. I mean, sometimes 3, 4, 5 times before you get to that angle in that position that is actually ideal. It's a pain in the ass sometimes, but effective.
Pro tip, take a picture and put it in your favorite so you could look at it next time you get there. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell the gym owner.
Yeah,
I hope he's not listening.
Fine.
Yeah, I mark the floor, usually with a piece of chalk. And you know how, this is how you can tell whether a gym owner washes and cleans the floors and how sanitary it is. Because if that chalk is on the floor and that mark is there 2 months later, you don't want to lie down on that floor to do any stretching.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. All right, so hopefully all the gyms that I go to are listening to other episodes, but not this part. So now I'm going to go same thing, but now see how I don't shoot hips back. I'm pivoting through the knee. So that is a lot better. Still slightly back.
A little bit, not much.
Yep, yeah. But better. And that's, remember everybody, I've got a really bad left knee with no meniscus in it and half of the VM removed.
Yeah, I don't know how you do half of what you do with legs.
Yeah. So that's moment arm. So once again, you have to drive your knee forward if you're elevating your heels to make it a pure quad dominant squat. I think heel elevation is awesome for the vast majority of people because as you saw with her, and I think everybody will tell you this, you get a little bit deeper. It allows for a better torso angle, right? So obviously power lifters, that's the big question I get. I still think a heel elevated quad dominant squat in a hypertrophy block is still a great idea for power lifters, but they're only able to use their lifters, but 98% of our power lifters are doing a low bar squat because you're going to be significantly stronger.
Yeah, it's a leverage issue too, correct?
Exactly. Yep.
You know, I've learned a few things over the years with Elite FTS, even though I'm there for the bodybuilding component of it.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because you clearly have the powerlifting background, but it's almost as if, well, here's the main difference between bodybuilding squatting or bodybuilding training and powerlifting. Powerlifting obviously is get the weight from point A to point B with, you know, the best mechanics that you can, but we don't care what muscles it works as long as I get, you know, green lighted.
Correct.
Where bodybuilding, we shouldn't care as much about the weight. We're more focused on targeting a specific muscle or a specific area or group of muscles. So in powerlifting, it seems to me like they came up with the low bar because it increases, it's a better lever system. So it's almost like where bodybuilding squatting, we want as much as we can get into our quads from that squat. Powerlifters want it as much as they can, like equally, like as much as I can get in my quad, but then I need my lower back to be equally as strong to handle the other third of the weight, the quads 1/3 of the weight, lower back, and maybe glutes, adductors, and, you know, arguably, obviously there's upper body too, but they're basically trying to disperse that load as evenly as possible through as many muscles as possible, where we're doing exactly the opposite. So people will ask, they're like, well, I don't know why you do high bar squats, or what's the difference between the two? That's the difference.
Yep.
We're not trying to make it leverage friendly.
Let's define each sport. Bodybuilding is making a lightweight feel as heavy as possible. Powerlifting is making a heavyweight feel as light as possible.
I
Done.
agree with that completely, with the one exception of and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I want to make the point. I don't consider bodybuilding a sport. But I understand that that's how people label it. So sometimes I will use that moniker, even though I don't agree that it's
okay,
accurate.
Or hobby or passion or
it's a pageant.
Exactly. Yeah, correct.
It's a beauty pageant.
But yeah, that's why that difference is there. And again, anybody whose quads blow up from squats are naturally doing a high bar squat, or they know how to drive their knees forward and pivot through the knee. But the longer your femurs get, the harder time you are going to have. That's why I know we're going down a rabbit hole, but like, those 7-foot basketball players, they ain't back squatting. They're doing like trap bar deadlifts for quad movements.
Exactly. And they should be, because they would have to be bent over so far that I don't even know if is that even a safe movement for that type of length of
probably.
femur?
I don't think so, because as you lean more forward in a low bar squat, or as your torso gets closer to the ground, the amount of shearing force is through the low back goes up dramatically.
Yeah, but let's not do that to high dollar basketball players.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, here's a great example, because he gets a lot of hate online for his squat form, is Lane Norton. He is incredibly hip dominant to where it's like a partial good morning. But that's what fits his structure. So he's powerlifting now. He's not bodybuilding anymore, right? Like, so he gets hate, but I'm like, how else is he supposed to squat without putting a massive wedge under his heels, which he can't do on meet day? Like, he has to do a partial good morning, because that's the anthropometrics of his body, with his body shape and limb and levers and all that. So you're going to have to figure out what works for you. But I will say, all my strongest folks, and I'm blessed to work with guys who squat over 900 raw. I'm actually hoping to see my first 1,000-pound raw squat Saturday at a meet I'm helping out, which that's just what? Like, that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
They are all low bar, legs as wide as possible, trying to get more adductor, making up for hip rotation, blah, blah, blah. But they're using their hips, not their quads.
Got a point and a question. And then I think we can kind of segue or transition into this next, which I think is important. It's related. Number one, I think that it should be noted, the wedge thing, if you're new to the sport or the pageant of bodybuilding, it's, you're like the younger generation. It's not a new thing. This is like, we just came up with this wedge thing. We were doing that in the 80s. There weren't wedges. We would just put 10-pound plates underneath our heels. Literally to the point where if you weren't doing your squats with something under your heels, you didn't know what you were doing, type of thing. So that's the point. Here's the question. And this is just I understand the answer already, but I want the viewers and the listeners to get this, because they may be wondering, because we didn't discuss it. You touched on it with adductors versus glutes coming out of the hole. But what I want to know is, what is the percentage? What are the hamstrings doing on these squats? The powerlifting low bar type style or longer femur style versus the high bar quad dominant style?
Yeah, so hamstrings are a stabilizer. They're not a primary mover. So I don't care what any social media influencer tells you. You cannot prioritize hamstrings on a leg press unless you're doing this weird 10-degree range of motion thing. The low bar squat will have more EMG hamstring activation. What's interesting is we're about to talk about weight belts, and one study, wearing a weight belt actually increased the surface EMG activity of one of the hamstring muscles compared to without. So that's interesting.
No kidding. Interesting.
But it is primarily a stabilizer. But yes, as you get more Good Morning-esque, it makes logical sense. Well, your hamstring's going to be getting a little bit more loaded, but it's still not a primary mover. It is a stabilizer. And especially in the world of bodybuilding, a cue that will fix a lot of people's squats is don't just drop down out of the air, dive bombing style, like a powerlifter or Olympic lifter.
Tom Platt style, huh?
Correct.
Yep. I mean, in fairness, yeah.
Picture pulling yourself down with your hamstrings, and watch how much better your low back position will be. You're significantly more stable. And that's before we even go down weight belts and bracing like we're about to. That cue of pulling yourself down, prioritizing a little bit more conscious hamstring activation, typically leads to a significantly better squat. And what's really important is the bar path will start becoming significantly more vertical versus this weird thing, right, that people will
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, exactly.
And that will tie to a lot of low back pain anecdotally. I don't know if that's been studied, but in my office, if somebody's bar path is all over the place, they usually have back pain with squatting.
Which is a great cue. I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it's valuable. If you're going to, or if you need to assess the form on the squat, obviously video from the side and follow. This is the first thing that I look at is the bar path.
Yep.
Where is the bar starting? What does that path look like until it gets to the bottom? And what does it look like as you're coming out of the hole? It should be fluid. It should be, I say, a straight line, or relatively straight line. There should be no what you're talking about, almost kind of like a zigzag or a type of thing. It should be very, very fluid. Yep.
Yeah.
Good
and
point.
Then I will say though, if somebody still really like wants to squat for bodybuilding, great. I think a Smith machine's way better for bodybuilding than a free bar.
I do as well. Yeah, I do as well. It just locks you into that path.
Hopefully it's still vertical, but if you do have to do the angled, if you want more quad dominant, that angles away from you because it will drive your knees slightly forward. If you're more of a low bar squatter because you want to be super strong for the gram and impress other dudes, then you would have it, the angles facing back. So now you're driving your hips back. But to be more quad dominant, if it is one of those angled leg press, make sure it's pushing your knees forward in the bottom, not the vice versa.
So essentially the bar will be further back if you want it quad dominant at the top than at the bottom. This is obviously an exaggerated angle.
Correct.
But I get what you're saying.
Which means most gyms you actually will not be facing the mirror now.
Exactly. Because why do they set? They don't set them up. Well, I say they don't set them up for squatting. I think they set up the Smith machine for benching because they want to be able to get the bench in there, which is odd when you think about it. But it's also a space issue. It's a footprint type thing too.
Yeah.
Great opportunity right now. Then let's segue into the belt and the bracing. And I want to ask you just flat out first: use a belt or don't? Yeah, it's nuanced. I know my response will be.
So here's my answer because I get asked this a lot in office. If you're going to use a belt, use it consistently on all your working sets, not your warm-ups. I personally do not like the powerlifter mentality of this is my belted PR movement, this is my beltless PR movement, because it does change bracing mechanics quite a bit. Now, and then again, for that sport, you can make an argument. For bodybuilding, I don't think so. So like either consistently use it on all your working sets. I'm not saying use it on all your warm-up sets, or consistently don't, because it changes bracing, it changes cueing, it changes the amount of activation. Like I just pointed out, even the activation of your hamstring, the biceps femoris, which is, your outer hamstring, that will be more recruited with a belt versus not. So, again, we know the limitations of the studies, but that's an important caveat. It does change stuff. So that's my answer. I know it's not like an ultimatum, but either do it on all your work sets or don't. But the back and forth, I don't think has its place in our world. What do you think?
What I do is this: I use a belt consistently for everything except legs. And that's going to seem kind of odd, but I'll tell you why.
All right.
And remember, I've had a lot of back injuries.
Correct.
I herniated that L4, L5 9 times. I've had to shit in the shower, standing up 4 or 5 days at a time, which is incredibly humbling. I'd arguably say humiliating, but when it's just you, I don't know if you can be humiliated by yourself. I'm not sure. I would have to look up the definition. I know the difference between shame and embarrassment.
Correct. Yes.
Embarrassment, you need a crowd, essentially, and shame is internal. So there may be a little bit of shame there, but I don't know about, humiliation, but definitely humbled me. Point is I have gone through years of using them and years of not using them. And I'm 41 years of training, Dr. Marv, and I can't tell you definitively, matter-of-factly, when clients ask me whether to use it or not. I think it's so individual. The reason I don't use it on legs is because I want to say some, because I had so many of these lower back injuries, and I've been injury free for 9 years. So because I continue to do what I'm doing without the belt, I'm not going to change it. The belt sometimes gets in the way. This is the number one thing that stood out to me was in the bottom position of a squat. hack squat, that sort of thing, it will dig into my hips so bad that it's painful. I've tried different sizes. I've tried different things. The only thing I could really do is go back to the old school Valeo. I don't know how you say it, where it's Velcro. And I quit using those because years ago, I wasn't very strong, but I was strong enough for that Velcro to not hold. And from there, I said, this will never happen again, because that could have been absolutely horrible. And because I'm with Elite FTS, I know that they make the best equipment and the best gear in the world, arguably the most expensive, but for good reason. And so I'm going to use the best that I have available to me. So that it'll dig into my hips, and oddly, it'll dig into one a little bit more than the other, which clearly is another discussion in and of itself, because the hips may not be as even as they should be. But nonetheless, it's painful. The second thing that stands out is this. In the bottom position of a squat, sometimes a hack squat, that belt will be so loose that I feel like someone could put their hand down the back of it. There isn't, in that bottom position for me, much of a brace. I don't know if it's because of I'm older, I have more distension or something. When I don't know what it is, but I know that without the belt, it forces me and my normal natural mechanics to brace without it. And it also limits my weight that I can use, so that there's not I don't want to say a crutch, but much like you would use knee wraps to kind of increase the poundage, I don't want to do that either. There are other reasons I don't use knee protection anymore. That's a totally different discussion, but it's not beneficial for me. I have to approach legs these days, because of the injuries that I've had over the years and training that long, that I need to limit the load as much as possible, so that everything that connects the muscle to the bone isn't going to be a vulnerability. So that works for me. The only reason I wear it with everything else, obviously for back, I want a little bit of extra bracing if I'm doing bent over rows, things like that. But I'll be honest with you, the other part is, and this is, if people are going to be like, whoa, I would not have thought you'd do that. It's not necessarily vanity, but because I'm older, and especially in the off season, I want to be able to hold and be reminded to hold my abs tight all the time, versus just kind of letting them go while I'm in there training. So it does help with that. And I think it's going to be important to note, you're probably going to touch on this, but how to wear that belt. There's too tight, and then there's wearing it the right way for the use as far as bracing against the belt. But I'll let you take that. Like I say, we all know, listeners know, you're the brains of the operation here. So go for it.
Yeah, so I even took some notes because I was looking at a bunch of research late last night. It was great cure for insomnia, but it did the job.
Or it causes it, one or the other.
Yeah. So in general, weightlifting belts can enhance performance by increasing what's called intra-abdominal pressure, which we theorize, take some of the load off of the spine. It definitely influences lifting kinematics, which I will explain, and muscle activation. Now, the research on muscle activation differences is mixed, so it's really interesting. So a lot of times this is what the data says, but remember, we talked about it in the first episode, evidence-based is data, experience, and preference. So just because, like for you found that you don't like wearing a belt on legs, great. Again, everybody's an N of one, so figure out what works for you. And we do know, though, it also seems to reduce perceived effort of a movement, which could be really helpful, especially with higher rep squats compared to lower rep. So that almost tells me it might even be a little bit more beneficial for bodybuilders, according to one study, than powerlifters, but all powerlifters do them, right? Because it does help with the pressure. And remember, some of these folks are getting under, that one woman, I forget her name, I watched her, squat 660 for 3.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane. She better be wearing a belt, correct?
Yeah, ridiculous.
Raw, like a female squatted that raw. It was amazing. Yeah. I work with multiple females who squat well over 5, 100% drug-free, but they wear a belt. It's mind-blowing. So there is going to be differences between the type of belt and user. So in general, we know that weightlifting belts increase intra-abdominal pressure, and that will help stabilize the spine and take some of the compression off of that. So one study, when they're doing sets of 8 reps of squat, found that it increased intra-abdominal pressure by 25 up to 40%, and it increased the speed of the squat without messing with muscle activity, especially the later reps in a set of 8. So as the set progressed, belt versus no belt, with a belt actually kept the speed up and it helped them finish the set off. So that's pretty interesting. Now, in terms of spinal loading reduction, it's a little interesting to where one study said it might not be as much as we thought. And when they're doing the study, they literally did no weight belt, with a weight belt, inhaling before they started the descent, and then they did not inhaling before, which I thought was kind of weird. So I was like, that's so counterintuitive anyways. When they inhaled before they initiated the stent, they saw a 10% increase of intra-abdominal pressure, but the researchers concluded that it wasn't that the most important part of that was a muscle called their TVA, or transverse abdominis, the vacuum muscle.
Yeah.
That was the one primarily responsible, because as soon as other muscles like your six-pack abs or obliques, when we engage those, it will slightly flex the spine, because other muscles will flex the spine a little bit. And once we have a loaded spinal flexion, it seems to take away some of the benefits of that. We are going to teach you how you could limit this, and in particular this, in a second, because this is the enemy for squats in general. But the TVA did that most importantly, and it was that the belt's mechanical properties, such as the stiffness, how it conformed to the body, that reduced spinal loading independent of intra-abdominal pressure. So you would think the intra-abdominal pressure is the only benefit. No, you pushing into that allowed your body to take some of the compressive forces off of the spine.
Question. Intra-abdominal pressure, is it the same term or the same thing as intrathecal pressure? What is
no, slightly different. Yeah. So we're intra-abdominal is the abdomen, intrathecal's pressure within the spinal cord and on discs and stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. Now I was told that, and it made sense, that part of the reason that I had a couple of the injuries that I did was I have a bad habit of too much pressure through it's almost like I'm not exerting the force through the actual muscle, but it's intra-abdominal or intrathecal. They use the term intrathecal, and that's why I'm not sure, because I've never heard that term otherwise.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I have a lot of pressure in my head. I'm not putting that pressure, and it's a reprogram thing that is very difficult to do after doing it for years. I got into a bad pattern of that. So is there something to that intrathecal pressure that could actually build pressure in a bad way that could be contributed or could have contributed to some of those herniations?
It probably wouldn't, because most herniations are when we are bending and twisting. There is a test called the Valsalva's test, which is exactly what it is, where I have somebody bear down and brace as if they're about to squat and about to sit on the toilet. And if you do have an active disc herniation, that will light up symptoms and you'll feel it down to the leg. So like that's something I will check on everybody before I check core strength and core activation. So they are, one is tied to the other, like they're tied. You can't create intra-abdominal pressure but they're talking about pressure in different areas of the body.
Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough.
Tied. So like when somebody has an active disc herniation, I'm not going to teach them maximal bracing, right? Because that's just going to flight them up like crazy. But once we could get that to calm down, then teaching the bracing becomes super important to prevent that type of injury from happening again.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yep.
And I think it's safe to say that these herniations, they're different based on location, and they're different from, and not just location of what disc, but where that herniation is within that disc, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them are on the backside and slightly lateral, which means to the side. That's the most common, and L5S1 is the most commonly done one, right? So
really? I thought it was
L5S1 is
L4,
number
L5.
one. L5 is the second.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting.
People with active herniations that are having symptoms down their legs, which if you look online, that's called radicular symptoms, in case anybody's curious. If you hear that term, that's what they're talking about. I wouldn't be doing maximal bracing activity, right? You still want to be building up the capacity, but I'm not going to have you bear down for all your worth trying to create as much intra-abdominal pressure as possible, unless you didn't pay your bill and I want to be a dick and flare up your symptoms in your foot, which I'm kidding. I would never, ever, ever, ever do that. Yep. So there's that. Now it does change kinematics, which means how the body's moving. So one study, it was on a deadlift, not a squat, but interesting to bring up, when they had them use wrist straps and a belt, it actually reduced the amount of knee flexion in a deadlift, and it allowed them to complete them faster with less perceived effort. So it will change how the body moves a little bit. The muscle activation, so like pretty straightforward what you would expect, right? So you would think, yeah, I'm going to create more pressure. The speed thing might interest people, as will like increasing activity, especially of the biceps femoris, which is your outer hamstring, and your vastus lateralis, the quad sweep, the outer quad. So those engagement increased with a belt versus without.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
muscle activation's different because it's mixed. Some studies will find a belt increases activation of your back muscles, like your erectors and everything like that, and reduce the activation of your abdominal muscles. And other studies are flip-flopped,
Okay.
right? So it's interesting. So again, that's why people are going to have to play around with it and figure all that out. The last thing I kind of brought up a couple times is it does seem that wearing a belt changes the perception of effort and increases comfort. So this is what I learned new last night that I messaged you where I'm like, oh, I did not know this. So awesome. Cause I'm about to give a very deep dive seminar on squats, turning it into a course, blah, 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 is not only did the subjects experience less discomfort, it limited the amount of, this is the term they use, spinal shrinkage, i.e. it reduced how compressed the intervertebral disc got during a workout. That
Okay.
I did not know that. That's wild. So I knew all the other stuff. I was not, maybe I learned it at one point, I forgot. So they were doing a weight training circuit and it was brutal. So these are college age males who are trained. Remember, that could mean just 6 months.
Sure.
But they did 3 rounds of 10 reps of 6 movements going from one to the other. Deadlifts, high pulls, squats, cleans, bent over rows, and curls. Interesting. And then they literally measured this was an old study from the early 90s. And they had, and it was statistically significant. So that means even when you look at data, it did make that's a rabbit hole. Sorry. It just meant that it's big enough of a difference that it matters. It reduced how much their intervertebral disc height got compressed from working out, which then again, somebody in your scenario or my scenario, because I had herniated discs and I'd broken my back when I was younger, could be really helpful. But if you find it digs into your hips, you don't like what it does, don't force it. But I will say a lot of bodybuilders, one, I don't like the thin in the front, thick in the back belt. That's for Olympic weightlifting. You're defeating the whole purpose because you're taking away the amount of surface area to brace and push against. But a lot of people I will see in the gym wear their belt way too low. It's supposed to be pretty much the bottom of the belt should be just barely below your belly button in most cases. Most people wear them way too low, and I personally am not a fan. And I'm sorry, I know a lot of people wear this, especially in the pro lengths, the awesome customized weight belt.
Sure.
But it's thick on the back, it's thin on the front. I don't like that. But I will say maybe for you, that might be a workaround so it's not digging into your hips. But as I said before, it does change your speed, your effort, the movement pattern. Like if somebody's going to go either to a belt or away from a belt, you better be reducing your loads and start retraining your body of how to do that without hurting yourself.
I always thought that the belt actually should or could arguably be bigger in the front than in the back. I always wondered, I'm like, and that's just how my brain works. I'm like,
yeah.
What if I turn this
Olympic
around?
lifters do that because, I mean, they are ass to grass. Like their butt is an inch off the floor. Like they can't use it. Yeah, like I don't use a belt on a leg press. Right? Because I'm trying to get my knees by my damn ears.
Yeah, there's no way that I can. Well, number one, I can't use a leg press. That's one of the few exercises that I just refuse to gamble with anymore.
Okay.
There are a couple things that I do completely stay away with. Or stay away from. Got a question for you, and it's something that I do, and this could be, you may be like, oh my goodness, why do you do this? And the reason is because at least so far, it has actually worked. I'm going to use hack squat as an example and a specific hack squat just so that you know or have an idea, because every hack squat is a little bit different, right? The Gen 1 Icarian hack squat, arguably one of the heaviest hack squats ever made, on this planet. And the reason that I bring that up too is it doesn't have a platform that can adjust. And the best hack squats in the world have a platform that can adjust. It's just great because then you can open up that angle, you can close it a little bit. It just depends on, it gives you more options, much like the Atlantis. I think Atlantis probably makes one. Or I'm sorry, Arsenal probably makes one because they make an adjustable platform for a pendulum, which is great too.
Yeah, no, their hack squat has an adjustable.
That's what I figured. Anyway, with the iCarrion, it doesn't. So we know the angle, or most people will know that angle. One of the first cues that I do when I get underneath the weight is because, we always say those few things to, I'm always, it's tight. Everything is tight. I'll keep them tight. 1 rep at a time. It's just this cue that and then number 3 is roll the hips. And what I mean by that is I don't know that it's exaggerated, but I roll the hips back. The reason I do that is because if they're underneath me, if my lower back is flat against the pad, that has caused or helped to cause, it's essentially a vulnerability for me. Here's an example to give you a little bit more insight into my injury without getting too in detail here. Some people will herniate a disc and they can't handle compression, like they can't put weight on their back. I can do that a week later. That's no problem. But I couldn't even get my feet up on a leg press platform or extend a leg extension with 20 pounds out to extend fully at the knee. That's the herniation. It was the same one every single time. And when I say 9 times, those were only the bad ones that put me in bed. It was from putting down a T-bar. Why they make T-bar rows go, why they make that bar sit in between the platform, the foot platform, is beyond me. Titan makes one that you can actually adjust the bar so that you don't have to put it all the way to the floor. And I'm like, thank you. But Titan isn't a commercial gym equipment manufacturer. It's kind of a halfway between a home gym and a...
Yep. It's super nice home gym. It won't last in a commercial environment.
Exactly. But a great idea. And I thought, why do they not do this? Anyway, the point is since I have been rolling my hips back and kind of, I hate to say exaggerate, but I'm going to use the word exaggerate the hip roll because it has to be there. And when it's there, even on a seated, I use I won't leg press, but I'll use a seated hammer horizontal press, and I have to do the same thing. I have to have that roll. What is that? Posterior tilt?
Are you doing your posterior tilting like that?
No.
So you're here
there
and
you're
going this way, or you're going this way?
I'm going that way. Assuming that your hand at the bottom is the tailbone, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. But yes, I'm rolling them. So what is that, an anterior or posterior tilt?
So this is anterior, this is posterior.
That's what I'm doing. Anterior. Posterior is a problem.
Interesting. Okay.
Absolute problem. And since then, no issue.
So you are flexion intolerant. Most herniated discs are extension intolerant. So you would do better with Williams rehab techniques, which is flexion based. I think it's Williams. God, I should know that. Sorry. Versus McKenzie is all prone press ups extension based. So most discs do better with extension, not great with flexion. But again, everybody's a unique individual.
Exactly.
And you would do better with, I'm pretty sure it's Williams. If I said it wrong, sorry, people. That's like Chiro. It's a Chiro approach. But so that's interesting. So that's actually going to go in the face of everything I'm about to talk about with bracing. So interesting. So I think
it also points out that there's exceptions, though. There may not be a lot of them. I might be an outlier, but it's clearly.
But I still would go to venture you're not doing an insane amount of anterior tilt where bones are hitting together, right?
Exactly.
So you're probably simply feels like you're anterior tilting. You might walk around a little bit of a posterior tilt. So you rolling forward might be bringing you a little bit more to neutral, right?
Because that very well could be.
So that most likely is what's happening without me obviously seeing it. So, but again,
and what do we do when we have a herniated disc? The ass comes right up underneath you, does it not? When you're walking, you're like, you got to keep that tight and keep that ass right underneath you. Ain't no putting it out there.
Yeah. So you're probably just getting to neutral would be my guess. Yep. So perfect segue. Bracing. So there's a million ways to brace. I am a dynamic neuromuscular stabilization guy. We call it DNS for short. Totally changed my life. We were talking beforehand. So when I was younger, I broke my back, a herniated disc. One of my bones in my low back healed to where it has shifted forward compared to everything else, which means I am very extension intolerant. And 2 to 3 times a year, I would throw out my back, not medical terms, but what the general person will say, for 10 years straight, 2 to 3 times a year. I'd feel a tweak and a pull as if something was pulling, and I would be incapacitated for 5 to 7 days, 2 to 3 times a year for over a decade. And I was a trainer. So if that happens, there was times where the only times I've ever canceled training sessions, I've trained people with broken arms, migraines, violently ill, blah, blah, blah. But the only time I had to cancel a session, I literally couldn't get off the bed because I stupidly went face down. I didn't know what I do now.
Yeah.
So I
never go face down. Yeah.
So DNS completely changed my life. So 2 things changed my life forever. Learning DNS bracing, which is what I'm about to teach. This is my cheat code. I probably shouldn't put this out there because this is how I get people, no matter how strong they are, to get them to be stronger, but whatever. And then I also started doing sandbag training, which is, I wasn't doing only up and down wannabe bodybuilder movements. I started doing sandbag training because you have to resist movement in all 3 planes of motion, flexing, extend, side bending, rotating at once.
I hope your wife does not listen to this podcast, because if you just mentioned those 2 things changed your life and you did not mention her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that goes without saying. Yeah.
Right.
That's funny.
Nice.
It's fun. Yeah. When we give my personal update, I'll tell everybody it was the second best weekend of my life just because she wasn't there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Good call.
Yeah. So let's talk about DNS bracing. I was trained in it. So here's why people should do it. Here's a perfect example. When I'm not strong, I'm stubborn. I learned this approach when I was in chiro school. So, I was really happy to do my 3-plate squat, free squat for 4 reps, and my back killed me. Then after doing the seminar, I was trained in it and I'm not breaking HIPAA because this is common knowledge. I was trained in it by a man named Dr. Michael Rentala. I always give people credit. He's the one who worked with Chris Duffin in his Grand Goals campaign. If you don't know what that is, Chris Duffin did both a squat and a deadlift at 1,001 pounds for 3 reps each. What? He also, though, but this applies to all sports. He worked with Phil Mickelson his entire career and Kelly Slater's entire career, right? So this applies to all sports. But when I teach people to an office, we focus in on it in the gym first, and then it'll bleed into their sports, whether that's rugby, cycling, paddling, fencing. It's helped somebody.
But golfing
Wrestling.
and powerlifting is a huge disparity.
Correct.
Which
more
makes
golfers
it
are
even more
lifting now.
True.
Yes. Yep.
Very good point. But
so
that's
this
a big
applies
disparity.
to everything. Yeah. So here's the DNS concepts. And I cover this before, so I'm just going to literally do verbatim of how I teach people in office. So I'll do a cool party trick. We kind of did this before. We talked about it last episode, where I'll have them put their arms straight out, push down, they resist. You look up, push down, your strength will go down. Same thing happens when you're doing a leg curl. So this is my opinion. This is not DNS. We do know for a fact when I extend my neck, I extend my low back, which is why I hate the cue, and we talked about this last episode, of looking up in the mirror at the bottom of a deadlift, right? So we know for a fact, what do we do when we get startled? We jump down to protect our organs. So this is my opinion. I think this force output is an old ancestral defense mechanism of quit fighting something with your abdomen exposed and cover up. Okay, so now we're going back to what DNS is known for. We have all these muscles on our low back bones, but none on the front. So if we're not creating enough intra-abdominal pressure, they're going to win and they're going to slam us into extension, which decreases force output. And I know some people had a hard time when I did my video about that. Remember the guys at West Side, their erectors are the size of goddamn paint cans.
Yeah.
So they're not getting into this end range extended position, right? They might even be getting to neutral, kind of like what you're doing.
Right.
So also, this creates a lot of pain. If you've ever done squats or deadlifts and your low back is on fire, you can't even drive home because your back pumps are so bad. And by definition, so remember, we're doing this. So here's my belly button. Here's my rib cage. Here's my hips. If I'm scissoring open, well, then by definition, here's my thigh bone. It's starting way back there in the socket, not a centralized position. So that'll also make mobility demands harder, especially if you're somebody who already struggles with hip mobility And the same thing happens at the shoulder, but we'll keep it to the low back because of the scope of the conversation. So those are the benefits: less pain, better range of motion, more force. I think that's a win-win. So,
Okay.
and what we could do is I will show my screen, and I'm going to talk people through it. So you don't even technically need to watch the screen. So I know we're trying to get this on Spotify. I will talk you through it. Just if you can watch, it'll be better. So here's how I teach people. So what we do is we lie face up, and somebody can do that right now. So you're going to lie face up wherever you're at, and you're going to bend your knees and put your feet flat on the table. Bending your knees brings your hips up to be parallel with your rib cage, because our goal is to keep our rib cage and our pelvis, aka our hips, perfectly stacked and parallel. Okay. So what you're going to do in this position, you're going to put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly. Like you see, this guy was an amazing Olympic powerlifter who went to powerlifting, and we saw incredible results very quickly. And he was a 400 or 500 Oli lifter. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Incredible results doing this. So one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly. You're going to do belly breathing only, aka diaphragmatic breathing, meaning your chest hand does not move, only your belly hand moves. And folks who are listening, or even skip, you could do this right now where you're sitting. You don't have to lie face up. Why I have people lie face up is it takes gravity away, and it makes the feeling your hands moving a lot easier, but you can still do this seated. Use English. Hand on your chest, hand on your stomach. Only your belly hand moves. If you're having a hard time with that, as the folks who are watching, you could see I'm pushing down on his shoulders to take that option away, because not breathing through your belly, which goes against society, right? We always want to suck it in, but breathing through your chest where your shoulders are constantly elevating, that's called paradoxical breathing. That is tied to both neck pain and low back pain. And then in the gym as bodybuilders or on sport, like I said, all those other things, because your diaphragm's a huge stabilizer of your low back. So hand on chest, hand on belly, only your belly hand moves. Okay, so once people get that relationship down, usually most people don't need to put hand on chest, hand on belly. But I will say, if you have chronic neck pain, just check throughout the day. As we get stressed out, check throughout the day, 1 or 2 breaths a couple times a day, make sure the belly hand's moving. Yeah. Then I tell people I'm a visualization guy. So don't think about you having a core and midsection. Think about you having an oil drum. So your diaphragm is the lid of the oil drum. Your pelvic floor muscles are the base of your oil drum, aka what we're sitting on right now. And then we are going to actively try to push out, creating intra-abdominal pressure, a perfect 360 degrees, just like an oil drum. Because you and I could stand on an empty soda can, but the second you put a dent in the soda can, it's going to collapse. It's like are you firing a cannon on a canoe or on solid ground? Right. So once you have that relationship, then you're going to go, and we use our hands for feedback. There is 6 hand positions that we will do to practice this. And I've been doing this approach for 7 years. I still rehearse this in a different position, but before every major lift that my core is going to be taxed, I do this in the gym, and there's a huge difference. So the official positions we're going to use to practice this bracing strategy is 1 and 2, upper abs, lower abs. Now you're going to breathe out, try and push your belly full of air. So imagine pushing your belly button away from your spine. Think Thanksgiving Day food baby, to where when you're watching yourself training, you should be appalled by how distended your abdomen is when you're training. Then suck it in and flex for all your bodybuilding shots or photo shoots. Right. But when you're training, Thanksgiving Day food baby. A lot of approaches say putting your tongue on the roof of your mouth and improves diaphragm mechanics. I say, sure, why not? Most people gravitate. But again, one hand is on your upper abs, one hand's on your lower abs. You're going to fill your belly, push it out as much as possible. Here comes the big twist. And this is where I call this an acid trip. The big twist is now, even on the exhale, you keep your belly expanded. So it's like you're doing a negative rep with your core. So especially as bodybuilders, we could be breathing our entire set and never lose our brace. Oh. So in the beginning, breaths might be shallow. If they're shaking or cramping, that is a good thing. It's trippy, but you're going to push your belly out. So you should be able to, and I'm not on camera because I think this visualization is better, but I could be talking to you and have my belly's not moving whatsoever. I'm inhaling and talking. That's the goal. So positions 1 and 2 is upper abs, lower abs. Once somebody gets that, now you're going to put your hands in the letter C around your side abs or your obliques. Now you're going to try to fill into both of your obliques or your side abs evenly. So now you're trying to picture expanding into there. Okay. You still want your abs to be filling up, but really focus on filling up on the sides. And just fun fact, 98% of people with a chronic injury, they will not be able to brace in the on like a shoulder or a hip or a limb. They won't be able to brace as evenly or as naturally on the opposite side oblique.
Right.
So people with chronic issues, there's that. So now, same thing. Practice filling both sides full of air. Once you have that, then you're going to do the whole cue of breathe in and then exhale and keep the belly expanded again. Okay. So I'm being a broken record on purpose. Hand on chest, hand on belly, just to get the belly breathing. Then the official positions, upper abs, lower abs is 1, 2, side obliques, side abs, 3 and 4.
Okay.
Then the last place we got to get to is our pelvic floor. Okay. So now he's doing it. Now, last place to get pelvic floor, you're going to take your fingers, you're going to push them right inside your front hip bone. So find that bony landmark, go in about an inch and push in. Same concept. Now you're trying to fill that quote unquote full of air. Now some smart ass is going to say my lungs are in my chest. We're talking about creating intra-abdominal pressure. And when I say breathe into your belly, we're using pressure to use fluid dynamics to expand that. So again, try and just focus on, can you push that part of your abdomen out? Once you could do that, then you will try to keep it expanded even on the exhale.
Okay.
So chest, belly to get the pattern. 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. And here's what's really freaking cool. And that's why I'm super excited about the whole maintaining disc height with a belt. When somebody's lying face up and they're bracing perfectly, if I stick my hand under their low back bones, i.e. their lumbar spine, will drop down. The only way that happens is if you are actively decompressing your spine. So lighter load deadlifts with this bracing strategy could decompress your spine. That's incredibly helpful for training age, how durable you are, how long you could do this. And then that's why I got really excited. Like, well, if this is already limiting the amount of compressive forces, now, of course, I'm hoping to see 1,000-pound Ralph squat this weekend. That dude's back is getting compressed, but we could limit some of it with this bracing strategy.
Okay.
It's going to take some time. I tell everybody, you're going to move half to 1 step back to move 3 steps forward.
Sure. And you have to want to do that and willing to invest that time. And some people are not going to want to do it, but you know what? Here are the tools. So use them or lose them.
Here's the joke I give. You're going to be really frustrated. You're going to think this is the dumbest effing thing I've ever told you to do. You're going to think I'm a moron. You're going to keep practicing. And one day it's going to click. And when that happens, the heavens open up, a dove flies down, light shines on you, you hear a choir, and you go, I now know how to do it. It literally will be like that, where I can't figure it out. This is dumb. Stay with it and finish it. The last thing I will say is I think practicing it with a goblet squat is the best way to do it, because you're starting with that perfectly stacked rib cage or pelvis. You could do technically a Zercher squat would be better, but we're bodybuilders. So bodybuilders are going to breathe differently than powerlifters. If you remember this rule, you'll know how to breathe and brace for every single movement in the gym. When you initiate the positive, your belly's full of air. Okay, so
that's good stuff. Yeah.
The squat, you descend or you do the negative first. On the way down, you're inhaling, pushing your belly out. Okay. Then by the time I'm at the bottom, my belly's full of air. No air is going in or out when you're changing directions from a positive to a negative. Nobody in their right mind does that anyways, but to stress, I'm inhaling down, belly's out. By the time I'm at the bottom, full breath of air. Then I drive up out of the hole. right? And then halfway up, or depending on your lung capacity, I could start exhaling. Inhale, hold my breath, exhale. Inhale, hold my breath, exhale.
Now, a lot of us we're inhaling before we even start the descent.
Yep.
And
so
holding that breath.
You can do that, but good luck doing a Widowmaker that way. Like, it's so much better if you could inhale. It also helps with like chest supported rows. Everybody hates chest supported rows. Nobody knows how to breathe. Well, I initiate a positive before I do a negative on a chest supported row. Inhale, pull, exhale on the way down. Inhale, pull, exhale on the way down. Boom, there's your rows are fixed.
Right.
Okay. When you're doing this right, say with a Zercher squat or a goblet squat to practice, it'll feel like you're on a Smith machine. You're going to be like, I've never felt this much tension and rigidity. The weight will feel effortless. It's awesome. It takes a lot of practice. This is why I never lead with this in the office. I prove I know what I'm doing before I lead with this, because they're going to be like, what? Especially if, you know, they're doing a good job bracing and they're really distended. A lot of people aren't going to like doing that. But once people feel the difference, they'll be like, I don't even care what I look like anymore, because I'm stronger than I've ever been. I'm feeling better than I've ever been. This is amazing. So
I think these are all good points with the breathing, because you got to remember, again, training for 40 years, there are habits sometimes that you pick up that you don't even think about.
Correct.
And that's when I realized I do have a breathing issue. And to go back and fix those things, once you have created a habit for so long, it is incredibly difficult to reprogram and rewire.
So let me nerd out for a second. Does this matter? Probably not, but it sounds really cool. So what I used to do when I knew my form was perfect and I was trying to fix something is doing something that activates a part in your brain that tied to motor learning. And you just got to cross your midline. So I would do my eyes side to side to side to side to side to side to side. And then I would start my working set on paper and functional neurology that activates a part of your brain that helps with motor learning.
That is something people do before they speak.
Okay.
That's an odd thing. When you're talking about that, I'm like, where have I heard this before?
Yeah.
It is something to do with, gosh, I don't know if it's breathing or if it's stress, or there's something there. That is a public speaking cue I've heard of before.
So specifically, it's activating your reticular activating system. It helps with motor learning. It probably helps calm you down and get like right brain, left brain. You just got to cross it. So like you could do some weird shit in the gym. I don't want to be doing this weird stuff. I just sit there. I don't do it anymore. But
what about
when
shadow
I first
boxing?
learned about it,
what does that do? Is that similar?
Yeah,
I mean, you know, I'm not very big.
You'll get on Gym Fails page or whatever.
I'm not very big and I'm not very strong. What can I do? Oh, I'm going to come over and shadow box like I'm a badass.
Just be patient learning the bracing, because it is going to be a project. It is. But once you get it, so then like I will then have patients practice that bracing when they're doing a Payloft press or a suitcase carry in the gym, because activating your core before you load your core with squats or deads, the research shows it reduces perceived effort and it makes you a little bit stronger. So like practice the bracing. So what I do to this day, when I'm about to, even if I'm hack squatting, I'm still going to activate my core. I put my resistance band on the machine or the rig and I do Payloft press. So if you don't know what a Payloft press is, you take a cable or machine. There's a million ways to do it, but essentially you're standing up, you're pressing that straight out with the band pulling to your side or cable and straight in and resisting rotation. But while I'm doing that, I'm pushing my belly out. And by definition, the band is pulling from my right. So challenging my core in an uneven way. So when I go do a hack squat, an even bilateral movement, it's easier.
You know what else the research shows, Dr. Marv? You may know this. I'm not sure, but the listeners might not. The research shows that if you don't want to work on proper bracing, that it's only a matter of time if you plan on spending any amount of time with this endeavor, whether it be just weight training, bodybuilding, powerlifting, you're going to have issues. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have lower back issues. So, you know, again, we're handing you tools. If you smack yourself in the face with it or you don't want to use it, that's okay. But there will come a time if you're in the game long enough and you do this long enough that you're going to either regret it or you're going to come back to this information. You're going to be like, oh man, I remember Dr. Marv and Skip talking about this years ago. Man, I should have listened to that. Or gosh, I need to find that information, because you may not see the value in it right now, but it's invaluable If you'd have told me when I was 25 or even 30, yeah, you're going to have really bad back issues, I would have laughed and went, no, I'm going to be so strong. It won't matter anyway. My mechanics are great. My mechanics have been great from day one, thankfully, because if they weren't, I'm sure I would have had even worse issues, or those injuries would have been catastrophic. And arguably, I wouldn't have been able to come back from them. So I'm going to try to take us out on that one. And you want to add something to it? Go for it. Go for it.
Well, what I tell everybody is if you really put in the work and you're practicing this 2 or 3 times a day for 3 to 5 minutes every day, regardless if you're in the gym, if you truly put in the work and you're not setting lifetime PRs within 8 weeks and you're actively trying to, you never have to come back in the office, tell everybody I'm a charlatan.
Right.
Nobody's done that. It takes practice, but people give up on it. They go, it didn't work. Did you try it? They didn't really put in the work. So
sounds like skip loading.
Yeah. So yeah. That's funny.
Don't get me
I got
going
a kick
on that,
out of your video. But so it is an endeavor. It's not an overnight thing. People with a singing background or a yoga background or a Pilates background typically pick it up quicker. Say you're having a hard time bracing into that oblique. You could put on a weight belt and stuff a sock in that side of the weight belt to give you more tactile cueing to push back. Or you could spend $300 on fancy belts designed to help people learn this bracing, but I'm a cheapskate. I literally had one CrossFit guy under his shirt because he could not figure out how to do this if we weren't touching his abdomen. He stacked 3 booty bands under his t-shirt because he was too embarrassed to do it in front of the crew. But he would put 3 booty bands covering his entire core under his shirt when he did the lift. And that's what, just like what you're talking about, cueing you to keep it tight when you wear your weight belt, it gave him that tactile feedback, helping his brain connect to it so he could learn it.
So I'm putting the sock in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Okay, on that point, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to segue into something that we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to start doing this. It's going to be kind of like we need a topic or a title for it for this topic too. So if any of the listeners want to help out with any type of feedback, it's going to be along the lines of like Skip and Marv, like hugs and kisses, personal time with Skip and Marv for 2 minutes, or I don't know, something like that. The reason is we want to give the listeners and the viewers who don't know us just a little bit of insight without us talking endlessly about the arguably maybe boring shit that we do. I don't know. I just turned 55 on Sunday. What fun shit do I do, actually? But it'll give you a little bit of insight. If you don't know us, then you can decide if you like us anymore or you don't like us anymore because we do different things than you do and you don't agree. So I want to ask you, Dr. Marv, because you have been doing, I get messages from you over the weekend and I'm kind of jealous because I used to travel a lot and I was, always at shows and stuff. And these days I want to hang out on the boat with my wife and my daughter and that sort of thing. So I saw you at the Arnold and I thought to myself, I wonder if this is one of the better, you were so excited because you're just in the thick of everything. And I remember when that started with me years ago and I was so excited. So tell me a little bit about that. What went down? I know a little bit about what went down anyway, but tell the listener what went down and where does that rank, on the ladder of like, wow, this is cool shit.
Yeah. Probably number 1 besides when I met my fiance. So I flew out to the Arnold to work with some of the world's strongest firefighter competitors. And it's not a dog and pony for publicity. It is a legitimate. Winners have gone on to be pro strongman competition at the Arnold. One of the people I worked with is now the 2nd strongest female firefighter in the world. Shout out to Haley Sickman. She killed it. Just to give you a frame of reference, she deadlifted 450 11 times in 60 seconds, did a 200-band sandbag steeplechase where you pick up a 200-pound sandbag, run, throw it over a bar, and another one, grab it, throw it over a higher bar. She had to win that event to make the finals, and she crushed it, beating her personal time by like 60 seconds.
Wow.
Day 2, a couple of the people I worked with didn't make the finals, but the fact they even completed it was amazing because their health stuff is like, shout out to them. I just won't say their names for that. Day 1, somebody really important snuck me backstage on the pro side, so I got to watch Thor warm up. And when he stood up, it was unsettling to say the least.
Right.
So that was really cool. Wasn't expecting that. Day 2, they did on the main stage. Arnold showed up. She got to compete in front of Arnold, shake his hand. Obviously, I went to the night show day 1. So everybody who's saying Samson should have won, obviously Samson's a great bodybuilder. It wasn't even close prejudging, or I mean, like the first night when Derek walked out, mind blowing, like stupid. So like, once again, you really have to be there before you start saying somebody gets robbed.
Sure.
So that was amazing. Met a bunch of people I really look up to. A couple people said they listened to the podcast, which we just started. So that's mind blowing.
Sure.
Obviously, I am the educated meathead. So that was Disneyland, Disney World, and Universal Studios all rolled into one for me. One of the best experiences of my life. Some more cool things are going to come as a result, but I will not share those yet till pen is on paper.
Mm-hmm.
But there's going to be some cool stuff coming. And that was my first. I got to meet Scott and Ron finally.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, that was my first time at the Arnold, and that will be hard to beat. Early in January, this is my last thing I'll say. I'm a goals guy, and I write down what I want to do. And before I knew I was doing this, I wrote a goal down as by 2028, I want to have a booth at the Arnold and the Olympia. And then didn't even know I was going to be doing something like this. So like, that's pretty damn exciting.
I was there in 2019 with Scott, and first time I've ever been to the Arnold, if I'm being honest. Had a blast.
I remember listening to those podcasts you guys just filmed like in chairs, right? Like it was at the end of the night.
The round table, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that episode, yeah. And I was like,
that was pretty cool.
That's what put in my head of like, dude, I need to start going to these things. But I've just been
get them all, to get us all in one room together, kind of face to face. It's different when you're doing podcasts. It's still fun and everything. Yeah. But when you're there, it's just very cool to be able to hang out and actually have conversations and laugh about stuff and kind of interact with the people who are there asking the questions. It's great. It's great. And I couldn't get there this year again. So, but I'll be at the O. You going to go to the O or no?
I already committed to something. I didn't realize the date.
Gotcha. And the Arnold is arguably bigger, especially when it comes to the expo and meeting people. I'm not going for the show, if I'm being honest. I mean, I'm curious, but I've been in this industry a long time. It's very anticlimactic to me. I don't have a dog in the fight. So, I don't have a favorite. Back when Phil competed and I knew him, he's from Colorado, I was from Denver, that sort of thing. We were in this run with the same people and, we were friends. And I wanted him to do well. But outside of that, whoever wins, I don't have an argument with it. I don't have any biases.
I do want to say one thing. All the top guys improved dramatically. Like everybody came out was better. So like, I am not throwing shade. Like that was, in my mind, that's at least since I have been really following the sport. Cause I wasn't following it when I was a kiddo in the 80s and 90s. Like that was arguably one of the best shows in decades.
And that's what I've heard from my peers.
Everybody improved. It was like all the top guys, leaps and bounds. Sean Clarita, what the bleep? Like he held his own more than so it was awesome. Mike looked great for Classic. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. Logan looked, holy cow. I thought there was going to be a bigger difference. Sorry, we're doing meet recap stuff, so I'll shut up. But it was awesome. But everybody improved, so I'm super excited about open bodybuilding because it's wide open.
Well, and what's cool, Andrew Barry said this best. It's back to what the Arnold used to be in the sense that now every 6 months or so, we have this high caliber Olympia type of show where where before it was just pretty much the O, and then the top contenders would stay out of the Arnold. They'd wait for the year because the O was the the pinnacle and the premier show. Now they're kind of coming back to where these competitors are crossing over and they're also competing at the Arnold. Absolutely. And good for Arnold to be smart enough to incentivize them monetarily so that they do want to compete. If I was Arnold, I would rather that people competed in my show than the Olympia, even though he's got the history with the Olympia and the Weider organization and bodybuilding in general. But if the money is there, if you build it, they will come. So, good for him. That's cool. Real quick, and I don't want to take too long. I do want to point out myself. I don't have anything exciting going on. I am excited that I am getting ready for Masters Nationals. I'm working with Justin Harris. Right. I've never worked with anybody in my life. Thought it would suck. So far, I'm like, why have I not done this before? This is so stress-free. Other than when you're getting ready to do the podcast and you see that you have to do a 900 carb load day and you have about 45 minutes to get prepared for that first meal. Otherwise, you're going to lose 2.5 hours. So, but really, it's just been great. I've never been this excited. I've been training for 41 years, competing for a long time. The last few years, I've not been able to make the correct decisions based on, I want to say emotion, but driving myself into the ground, my expectations, things like that. Handing over the reins to Justin is allowing me to do that. He's kind of pulling back on me, keeping a good pace, and not allowing me to drive myself into the ground. And I'm excited about that. So I'm looking forward to being on stage in July, maybe again in August, depends on how it goes in July. but very, very excited. So next time when we do this segment, we do want to do some personal stuff too. But we don't want to take too long. We know that, you, the listeners, the viewers, you guys are here because you want top-notch information and you want to learn stuff. We just want to give you a few minutes so that you can decide if you love us more or hate us more based on the personal things we do in our life too. And we are starting to get feedback. We're starting to get some questions and stuff because this is what, the fifth? I'm losing track, fourth or fifth episode. We're starting to build these every week now. So we're going to have more feedback and we'll be able to kind of get into those, the questions from you guys and kind of either go back to a topic or answer those questions for you. And we'll do that during the show as well. So on that note, I am going to take us out. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and ring the bell. It'll sound something like, oh, that would be the wrong one. Let's do this one.
There you go.
Yeah, it's going to take some practice, me getting these smart buttons right. But anyway, if you didn't like it, just pretend that you did. It helps us big time to get the show out there. We appreciate the feedback. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear any comments that you have, negative or positive. If you think we ramble, if you think I talk too much, I'm too verbose. Sometimes I am. Let me know that. If we get some good questions, we'll definitely answer them, or we will respond to those questions in the comment section. Check out truenutrition.com for Team Skip protein. Not only do I use it, my clients use it, but other top prep guys have their clients use it. It's that good. Discount code SKIP, it can save you a few bucks. Dr. Marv, how can people reach out to you if they have questions or they want to reach out to you to work with you?
Yep. So Instagram, I'm most active on at dr.marvin.saysdc. My website's theeducatedmeathead.com. I showed you a part of the online bodybuilding course I put together. And then Saturday night, launched a garage gym athlete program. So right now it's consults, seminars, courses, and that type of stuff. I do not work one-on-one just because I have too much stuff going on. So if it's one-on-one, go with Skip. He might know what he's doing. But if you just want workout programs, a consult, whether that's a movement assessment for posing, let alone bodybuilding, courses, seminar recordings, that's what I offer.
I'm easy. All my contact information is at teamskip.com. Plus, very cool merch. Got the new colors, very unique colors. I got a lime green. I got all these different colors. It's awesome. Hoodies, tanks, that sort of thing. No hats yet. I'm working on the embroidery. All they do is screen. I got to have embroidered hats. It's just a me thing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could follow me on Intense Muscle on Instagram as well. Got some cool stuff there. We'll be putting out a show as we always do now every Tuesday. So look for the new drop every Tuesday. Until then, join us again next week for another episode of Between Two Dumbbells.